This film illustrates the rearing of Edwards' atlas moth, scientifically known as Attacus edwardsii. Atlas moths belong to the silk moth family, which are characterized by their spinning a particularly elaborate cocoon when they are ready to turn into a pupa or chrysalis. This moth is stated to occur on the lower slopes of the Himalayas. I believe the climate there can be very warm during the daytime, but it's clear from my experience that the species is able to tolerate much lower temperatures, perhaps a necessity during the cold nights in the Himalayas without the daytime influence of the sun. Edwards' atlas was difficult to obtain for many years, but it became available again in 2012. Usually either eggs or cocoons containing pupae are offered. I prefer to buy eggs because I can then see the caterpillars grow to maturity and observe their behaviour and changes in appearance. The rest of this film illustrates how I currently rear them. Garden privet is unlikely to be their natural food, but it turns out that it is a perfect substitute. Cut sprigs of privet, on which I feed them, grow very well in a jar of water. Rightly or wrongly, I smash the base of the sprigs with a hammer, on the assumption that this may help the cut ends to draw up the water more efficiently. I put the eggs in a plastic box lined with a paper towel, with a few pieces of privet to provide the tiny caterpillars with something to eat when they hatch. Actually though, their first meal is their eggshell or part of it. In this shot you can see some of the half-eaten shells, and you can see one of the caterpillars in process of eating its empty shell. As soon as the caterpillars have started feeding on the privet, the presence of droppings beneath the leaves is a good indication of this, I put the little pieces of privet with the caterpillars on them among the sprigs standing in the jar. Hopefully they will move on to the fresh new leaves. If some of them don't, I have to gently encourage them to do so. The matchstick will give you a good idea of how small they are at this stage. The caterpillars grow quickly and soon have to molt in order to grow. Their skins are elastic, but there are limits to elasticity. This shot shows some caterpillars in their first instar. An instar is the period between two stages, that is, the period between hatching from the egg and the first molt, the periods between the subsequent molts, and the period between the final molt and the caterpillar turning into a chrysalis. Most species of caterpillars have 5 instars, that is 4 molts, but the big atlas moth grows so large they need an extra molt, that is, they have 6 instars. A peculiarity of this species is that from now on they exude a covering of white powder. What the purpose of this is, I don't know, but it may be to make them distasteful to predators such as birds. The caterpillars on my hedge were so big and conspicuous that they must have been seen by all the birds in the vicinity, but they were not touched. And can't they eat? In this sequence you can see the caterpillar's tiny eyes, the little black dots. I don't think they function well, they probably just serve to enable the caterpillar to distinguish light from darkness, day from night. As the caterpillars grow, it is necessary to give them more privet and perhaps to set up more jars. Molting seems to be a stressful business in the extreme, and the following sequences, some of them speeded up, well illustrate the procedure. The caterpillar strains and stretches itself until the skin splits behind its head. It then gradually worms its way out of the old skin. In real time this takes half an hour or more. The white band along the side of its body is the equivalent of our breathing organs, the trachea that carry oxygen into the body. These are also replaced. You will see it knock off its old head, a bigger head having formed beneath it. Here you see the caterpillar eating part of its old skin, when after some hours it had recovered sufficiently to do this. The matchbox shows just how enormous these caterpillars do become. When the caterpillar has finally finished feeding and is ready to pupate, that is, turn into a chrysalis, it will give you an unmistakable warning by producing a clear greenish liquid, in contrast to the solid droppings it has previously passed. Then it will often leave the privet and wander aimlessly about, searching for a site to make its cocoon. This is the one time when rearing these caterpillars can be frustrating. I find the easiest way to cope with this is to confine them in a plastic box with some paper towel for an hour or two, and then return them to the leaves. If they still don't settle down, I put them in the box for another spell. Having finally given up its wanderings and chosen a suitable site amongst the leaves, the caterpillar begins to plaster the twigs and leaves with silk. It then proceeds to bite through the twig or leaf stalks so that they hang down loosely, supported just by the silk. You can see the strong threads in this sequence. Gradually it encloses itself, pulling the leaves around it, as you can see here, sewing them together. As the threads become denser, the caterpillar slowly disappears from view. Here you can see that the caterpillar is turning round so that its head is at the top of the cocoon, which is the position it needs to be in to enable it to emerge next year as a moth. This sequence shows a moth 9 months later forcing its way out of its cocoon and lowering itself into a position where its still soft, undeveloped wings can hang down loosely, clear of any object, so enabling them to expand and then harden. The expansion of the wings is achieved by the moth pumping blood into them. Extension of the wings takes only a few minutes, but the hardening, ready for flight, takes some hours. Breeding the moths is easy with the right equipment. Pairing nets can be purchased from butterfly and moth suppliers. The moths are only active at night, but if a fresh male and female are both available at the same time, they will readily pair when it is dark, and the female will quickly lay its eggs on the netting. I say quickly because these moths have no mouth parts and so can neither eat nor drink. Consequently, they only live for a few days. This shot shows a battered and barely alive moth that is less than a week old. The eggs are surprisingly tough and can be easily scraped off the netting without damaging them with one's fingernails. Clumps of eggs adhering together can be separated with the fingers. They can then be placed in a plastic box as described at the beginning of this film. At room temperature, they will hatch in about 12 days. Thus we have come full circle. Each fertilized female will lay dozens, perhaps hundreds of eggs, and there will be plenty to give away to interested friends or to schools.